Welcome back to another episode of the Grown Man Diaries. Today, I want to talk a little bit about thanking your past self. I think so many times we talk about past regrets or what we wish we would have done different, but how often do we go back and actually express gratitude or thankfulness for decisions that we made in the past that kind of have helped us get to where we are today? And so for me, as I was kind of prepping for future episodes and just interested as well, one of my close friends, I was talking to them about it, and he asked like how often I read back through previous journals. And I was like, every so often, but I dusted off some of the journals from around the COVID timeline. And really when I was going through my diagnosis with complex PTSD and kind of the journey of being diagnosed, finding someone, and then going through all of the treatment kind of with it, and just the highs, the lows, different things that were happening in my personal life, and then coming out of that. So I didn't like deep dive into the journals, but I started to just peruse them, seeing some quotes, seeing some kind of dropping into some different entries. And as I was reflecting back, it kind of reminded me of what it felt like to be in that hole and how much courage it took for me to actually continue to push forward. And I think that it's easy for me to get lost in the day-to-day of, where I am now. And there's still, and like there always will be in life, these trials and tribulations. But the reality is, damn, I'm so freaking proud of myself for actually like doing the work so that part of my trauma doesn't impact me like it used to. And so as I was thinking about kind of the journal entries and things like that, it also started to make me just zoom out even further to say, what about even things like further back than that? Maybe they're not captured in a journal, it's just like a memory, but they set me on a course. They helped me become the man that I am today. And hopefully in 3, 5, 10 years, I'll look back and say, wow, I so appreciate, myself now taking a leap or spending time, doing this activity or leveling up this capacity in my life, because that's going to help me in a future date. So that's what I want to talk about, today. But as I dig into it, would love just to hear, in the comments, what are some of those pivotal moments that have happened to you? How often do you go back and reflect to say, what was that choice like? How did that really help get me to where we are today? And express that sense of gratitude. Be proud of yourself. Let that, shine through, because it's a never ending journey, right? And even if we're taking baby steps or these small milestones to get there, it's good to be thankful, be grateful along the way, and to celebrate those wins. But damn, it feels really good to look back and say we're miles and miles ahead of where we were then. But I just want to go check in on that guy or girl and just remember what it was like to be there, but also get a little bit of that sense of that grit. Like, why did I keep pushing? And almost like in a movie or something where you see that flashback of the present self to the past self, and thank you so much for doing this, for continuing on. And so for me, with the journal entries, specifically, this is around COVID. I think a lot of folks kind of, just because we were forced inside, you really started to lean into things that maybe you hadn't dealt with, you hadn't struggled with in the past, and they started becoming to the forefront because we couldn't just go, do. You actually were confined, and so that's typically when it starts to bubble up. And so I definitely felt some of that, as well, but was going through, a mental health journey. But when I was reading the journals, the thing that really became so evident and apparent was every time, through the sadness, through not understanding how to move forward, I had a desire to go through it. I recognized that I'd been struggling for a long time with feeling my my true self, feeling the highs and the lows of what it is of just being a human being. And so everything was kind of muted in my world. And so it was how I kept this constant theme of like, I want color back in the world. I don't care if it doesn't all have to be good, but I want to feel both good and bad. And in subsequent years, I've definitely felt very high highs and very low lows, but I could just resonate. And I was just so thankful that I continued to push through and to be vulnerable and to seek the help that I needed, but also to do the work in between those sessions, not to just rely on a magic bullet, but just to say, I am going to chop wood and get better, right? I'm going to make that conscious effort. And so what I also, for some small and big things, though, it made me think about this story actually with my aunt. So my aunt was a professional artist, and she was an amazing painter and illustrator, drawer. She was great graphic design and all of that. But we were all together one year on vacation, and she was sitting out on the balcony with her sketch pad, and she didn't have a pencil though. She was sketching with a pen, which my grandmother's also an artist. But she would always sketch with a pencil and then, do the oil painting over the top. And so as we're out there, and, I'm like single digits, right? Somewhere between like 6 and 8. I'm not very old. And I'm talking to her and just like, what are you doing? What are you drawing? Blah, blah, blah. And as we're talking about it, I was like, oh, Grandma always draws with a pencil. Why are you drawing with a pen? And she looked at me and she said, well, a few years ago, I started to draw with a pen and I accidentally made a shade that was a little darker than what I wanted. It wasn't a shade. It was more like fully filled in. And I was like, well, there's no going back now. And so if I had a pencil, I would have erased it and just kept going with that original kind of vision. But I didn't. And so then I colored it all in. And at the end of it, I was like, wow, this drawing is just way more powerful. I love the contrast. And it's all because I made this subconscious, you could call it a mistake, a subconscious brushstroke, whatever you want to say. But the fact that it's pen, it's permanent, I had to lean in to that direction. There was no going back. And that really stuck with me. This concept of like, no, everything that you're doing for the most part is in pen. You can try to get back on that other course, but if you're going to go down this path, there is no dipping a toe in. It's always diving in with 2 feet, and you got to see what happens. And so I've really taken that through kind of my entire life. And I think that that's something that I'm very thankful for. But as I was, going back and reading some of these journal entries, it definitely became apparent that as soon as I decided that it was, A or B, I'm going to pursue that entirely. I'm going to have checkpoints along the way to try to challenge my perspective, to see about changing my mind, but it's not going back on the path that I came. It would be then another split and trying to get to another path, and we would see what happened at that point. And there are a few other instances that this has definitely happened to me that stand out. Again, both big and small. Probably try to focus more on some of those bigger life events, but the one that is small, I would say, but I experience it every single day, is when I was very young. Like my grandmothers watched us, quite a bit. They were both really good cooks, and I was always interested in what they were doing in the kitchen, how you could add different spices together, different quantities, and it would change the flavor, the texture. Food was always a big part of our family's lives, and so I love the idea of being able to kind of create that. I think to me, it's a little bit of where my artistic ability comes out even today, is in cooking. But one summer, when my sister and I were both younger, not involved in too much in the summer from sports or things like that, because it just wasn't viable when you're 8-10 years old. So they enrolled us in these summer programs at the local community college. So there's everything from computer programming to art to like cooking, and they would all be like a week long, let's say. So I remember in the cooking class, so you made like a Mexican dish, an Italian dish, so on and so forth over the course of the week. And then you got to obviously like taste it, but you got to learn how to read a recipe and do all that. And I think that that's something that I really hadn't thought about much. Like after that point, I really enjoyed it. I liked it, but I never took like going to culinary school or something like that, like serious. It was more of like a hobby. Also, I was told like you better know how to cook food because you're going to need to eat when you're a grown up, and you can't rely on other people, and you can't afford to like buy food out all the time. So that kind of stuck with me. But the fact that, you know, within my grandparents, specifically my grandma's, then taking that like week-long course set this foundation for like me loving to cook. And it's not something that seems like a chore on the daily. It's obviously I don't like cleaning up afterwards. That's just like part of it. But 70% of cooking I really enjoy. And so like between my wife and I, like we share that responsibility on cooking for the week, cooking for our daughter, trying to come up with different recipes or things like that. And I feel like that choice early on, not necessarily to go to the cooking class, because that probably wasn't my choice, but to lean in, to embrace it. And then that kind of carried through my whole life from that point, even at a recreational or hobby or just a fundamental skill that allows me to have kind of less of a burden on the day to day on how what we're going to eat, because I know that if there's things that we go to the grocery for, we can always figure something out to make for dinner that night. So that's like a very small thing, but at the same time, I feel like for me had huge implications. And then when I think about, you know, bigger decisions, one of the biggest decisions that I had to make was where to go to college. And I think that so many people not struggle with this, but they face that decision on what do you do after high school, right? Is it a trade? Is it to go straight to the workforce? Is it college in some capacity? And, you know, my niece just went through this earlier this year, deciding schools and big school, small school, Greek life, not Greek life, where your friends go, where they don't go. Do you want to like, how does this set you up for your future? Because it's a huge decision, and so much of what comes afterwards, you just don't know. It's just a guess. And so I think, you know, she actually texted me last night with how excited she was about the sorority she joined and just the fit that she feels like it is and the sense of community that she was really longing for, because didn't necessarily have that same thing in high school because of some moves and things, you know, that were out of her control, but, you know, their family needed to do that. So that just got me thinking about, well, that was a big fork in the road for me, because I was dead set on playing college football, or, you know, originally college basketball, and then some injuries, you know, happened, tore my ACL a couple times, lost a lot of on the basketball side, I just quit growing. So, you know, you're a 6'1" power forward's not going to do too well in Division I basketball. So then moved into, you know, football became more of the dream. I was getting recruited a little bit, going to some showcases, doing some different things, and then had, you know, my whole junior year wiped out with injuries, worked back, great senior year, and now I'm coming to the end of senior year saying, okay, I've been accepted, you know, had good grades, decent test scores, was accepted with scholarships to pretty much everywhere that I applied. And so it was down to like two schools. One, a state school that like my friends were like, you should walk on to the football team. I wasn't going to walk on to the football team. Or to go to a small liberal arts school, play football, but also have a totally different campus experience. One was extremely urban. One's out in the middle of a cornfield, right? 1,000 students versus like 30,000 students. Go with my high school friends, or a number of them, actually be roommates with one. We had already picked out our housing, gotten scholarships, all these things, to where, like, if you put it down on paper, it didn't really make any sense for me to go to the small liberal arts school. It was more money, theoretically less opportunity, because they just didn't have that big school name, but a lot of their alumni had gone on to do amazing things. But it's really place where you kind of learn how to learn, and then it's up to you to make something out of that. And so I remember I'm kind of struggling, going back and forth. My parents are really the ones that are like convincing me to go to this like scholarship day, to go to do a football visit. And I remember going on both, tours. But the thing that I remember when I was at the smaller liberal arts school is like there was more of a sense of home. There was more of a sense of like these people that I'm interacting with. Like I could see myself not just like going to school here, but I could see myself like meeting lifelong friends. I can see the level of accountability because you're going to a school that's about the size of my high school, right? But for college. And so to me, I actually like that sense of kind of connection, that level of accountability, the fact that like it was important for me to show up every single day, because if I didn't, my presence would be missed. So maybe it's a little bit of wanting to be a medium-sized fish in a small pond or something to that nature. But I also think some of it is in the back of my mind. I didn't want to stay in the area that I grew up. I had always kind of had aspirations to get out of there. I didn't necessarily know where, but I didn't see the opportunity. I couldn't envision like a life there from a long-term standpoint. So made that decision, went to that smaller liberal arts school, played football for a year, and then decided, I didn't want a third knee surgery. I really wanted to just focus on academics. I joined a fraternity, and so I was kind of going down that whole kind of path. And it was so phenomenal for me. Like the fact that my fraternity brothers, I was able to then parlay that into getting an interview for an internship a couple years later that then resulted in a job. And then there was a pivot that happened, after that, but not to go too far into the future there. Just that aspect of like where I went to school directly impacts the rest of my life. And there were just these small kind of choices along the way. But I feel like as soon as I knew that it was the small liberal arts school, I was kind of all in, and I had to make some tough calls. I had to call my friends. I'm not going to be able to room with you anymore. I'm going to go in this other direction. I'm going to actually meet all new people. I didn't even know my roommate. He was from, Florida, like 8 states away. Totally different, like culture shocks for both of us. But I think that it really helped me grow as a person. And I wouldn't change that, for the world. But if I had stacked it up on paper even today, I'd be like, man, why the hell did you make that decision? Like, how did you have that foresight? And some of it's just, that intuition, that instinct and leaning into it. And so, another story is I was early in my career working for a large retail company at their corporate office, and I was continuously getting promoted. I was very successful in my role. I was in great standing with this large company, and I had a career trajectory that like many people at the organization would have loved to have. But I started to see that like, I don't know if this is what I want to do, like long term, just based on how everything's moving online, brick and mortar retail, like it's here to stay, but it's not in the heyday of what it used to be. And also just the kind of commitment to what that day-to-day life looks like and the seasonality of like when the busy times are and when they aren't. And so I started to really look at, well, what do I want? And as I started to decide that, one of the things that really kept like calling to me is I want to try my hand at sales. One, because the money can be pretty lucrative for someone that doesn't have an advanced degree. Two, at the time I was like 23, 24, and I had like 40 sales reps calling on me for different products that they were trying to sell. And most of them like sucked. Like most of them just didn't meet the mark. They didn't listen to me. Frankly, they didn't care. They just like had their talk track, said what they were supposed to say, and then just pushed really hard for us to try to buy their products. And that just didn't sit well with me. It was easy to say no, but it was also easy to say, okay, I can see the 3 or 4 that are really good, and then everybody else is kind of middling or bad. I think I could be one of those 3 or 4 that's really good at this, because I understand what's happening with the buyer and everything else. And so I kind of made that decision, started looking at companies, and was dead set that, I'm going to leave. And that's when I was able to join, go through the interview process, find a startup in the city that I lived that was really building out their team at the ground level. There was 3 months of funding when I started. So I'm putting in my resignation, and everyone's like, "Oh, what are you going to go do?" And it's like this company that you haven't heard of. I'm going to go, try my hand at some sales. And they're like, "Okay, well," and then there's questions like financial stability and all of that. And it's like, well, I don't know. We got 3 or 4 months, and worst case, I just don't have a job afterwards, right? But I'm going to try it. And all we have to do is do it. And that was so interesting that from my perspective, it was so easy. And the work was really difficult, and to achieve the goals were difficult. But if we did it, we survived and we thrived, and we'd get more money, and we'd be able to hire people. And this is just what it is. Nothing comes that easy. But for the folks where I worked previously, it was mind-boggling. It was what such a risk that I'm taking, because a lot of these folks had worked there 10, 15 plus years. And so that was so far out of their comfort zone. But again, for me, it was, I have this feeling that I'm called to do something different. And so now when that opportunity presents itself, I need to make sure that I dive in with both feet. And, I don't know if that's what I want to do for my whole life or my whole career, but I was trying to listen and be in tune with those decisions and where I was going to go. And so ultimately it allowed me to, again, dive in with both feet, color and pen for that particular decision. And I just encourage, everyone really to take that inventory of where was I at previously? What am I grateful for in those decisions that I made? And then even more so, what am I proud of that person? And how can I make sure that I'm not losing some of that? Because we do change over time. And I think that's important to evolve, and our interest and discipline and motivation levels are going to ebb and flow at different points in our lives based on different, activities or motives. But I think we can still go back and say, man, I really appreciated my resolve or my grit. Let me tap back into that. Let me try to get a little bit more of that in the person I am today, because sometimes when you're in the muck, you're going through the mud, or you're faced with that decision, there's a lot of pressure and it doesn't feel good in the moment, but you're tapping into this part of you that really helps you persevere and get through it, get to the other side. And then when we're in a period of rainbows and butterflies, or even just having those sunny days, sometimes we need to go back and say, okay, what was it like when it was pouring rain? And it's not, I don't want to go back there, but I do want to take some of those characteristics and make sure that I'm continuing to lean in. So yeah, for me, again, it's just about diving in with both feet, trusting that intuition, but then, leaning back into that gratitude, that gratefulness. And so would love to hear from you all about, when have you colored in pen, when it looked like everybody else would have erased it and it worked out well, or even more so, what are you most proud of, some of those decisions that maybe you made, or that fork in the road that's helped steer you to where you are today? It doesn't mean that it's all easy, but it does mean that you feel good about it. You're standing 10 toes down and ready to go, ready to embrace kind of the rest of your life. And you feel like that was a launch pad to put you on this track. So I appreciate you all taking the time to listen to another episode of Grown Man Diaries. And until next time.